Coming up on Talking Points, under arrest. The leaker of Pentagon documents is apprehended by the FBI. How they claim the suspect spread national security secrets through an online gaming server, and what the government is doing to prevent it from happening again.
Plus, some House Republicans are proposing cuts to food assistance benefits. What two of their members who used those programs growing up have to say about that.
And the former president takes on his former attorney. Why Donald Trump is suing a key witness in the case that got him indicted. All that and more. Talking Point starts right now.
The Biden administration scrambling to assess the damage of a massive classified information leak from the Pentagon last month. Hey, welcome into Talking Points. I'm Chilekasi, Adele.
And I'm Teagan Brown. Federal agents arrested Air National Guardsman Jack Teixeira on Thursday and charged him with leaking the classified information. Talking Points analyst Jake Morel is in studio with that reaction. Jake?
Teagan and Chile, good evening. Several U.S. officials have said they're having closed-door conversations with foreign governments to try and ease the tensions created by these leaks. But before we get into that, let's take a step back and see how this even happened. In early March, photos of the top-secret Pentagon documents appeared on a Discord server, which is a social media messaging app used primarily by gamers, and the leaks spread from there. The Biden administration followed with a response on two fronts, finding out who did it and putting out the fires that it created. But it wasn't until last Thursday, April 13th, that federal agents arrested Jack Teixeira, an Air Force National Guardsman residing in Massachusetts. This brought up several questions. How did Teixeira obtain these documents, and why did he leak them? Even though he's only 21, Teixeira's job gave him top secret clearance, and although the investigation is ongoing, it seems as though he didn't leak them for money or any type of self-gain other than to look good on the internet. Pentagon Press Secretary Patrick Ryder commented on how irregular that is.
That this was we have rules in place. Each of us signs a non-disclosure agreement. Anybody that has a security clearance, and so all indications are, again, this is a criminal act, a willful violation of those, and again, another reason why we're continuing to investigate and support DOJ's investigation.
Now, the information leaked focused mainly on two things: the conflict in Ukraine and Chinese activity. Here's the 5 most important takeaways. First, the documents showed U.S. claims that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was, quote, too accommodating to Russia and that the U.S. was monitoring him. Second, that there are several groups of Western special forces operating in Ukraine, including from the U.S. and U.K. Third, that Egypt almost secretly supplied missiles to Russia in February, but never went through with the deal. And switching to another diplomatic issue, the 4th and 5th takeaways concern China. One was that China had been conducting experimental weapons testing of new missiles, and the other that Jordan nearly outlawed Huawei within the country because of suspicions toward the Chinese government's involvements with the tech company. Chile?
Well, Jake, you mentioned a lot of the international reaction is happening behind closed doors. What are the potential implications that we know?
Well, Chile, I think the stuff that we do know is, first of all, that U.S. intelligence is put in danger worldwide. And I'm not talking about just information. I'm talking about the potential of U.S. agents worldwide being put in danger. And speaking of that danger, I think we could see some civilians and some special forces in Ukraine being put in danger. I mentioned that information about the special forces in Ukraine, and no specific war plans or battle plans, but still lots of information leaked about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And also, the third thing is just so many people are calling this a massive diplomatic embarrassment for the United States.
And Jake, you mentioned that this leak has been a little bit different than those that we've seen in the past. Why exactly is that?
Well, Teagan, when you see all of the war information leaked in these documents, you think of the Pentagon Papers, but a lot is different since the 1970s. First of all, we have the existence of the internet, which allowed the information on these documents to be spread so fast and to be spread over a server of a video game that I played when I was a child instead of a trusted source like the New York Times or the Washington Post. But also, Ellsberg and Russo leaked those documents to deliberately try and bring an end to the Vietnam War. And so far, I mean, this is an open investigation, but it doesn't seem as though Teixeira had a specific motive for leaking these documents. So a couple key differences there.
Jake, thank you. And we have breaking news just into the newsroom this hour. Syracuse Congressman Brandon Williams has just passed his first piece of legislation with the unanimous support of the entire House of Representatives. He sponsored a resolution condemning the downing of a U.S. Air Force drone by Russian pilots.
In the past, Williams has called Vladimir Putin a monster. And as a former nuclear Navy veteran who went on 6 deterrent submarine missions, Williams says he introduced the bill because he understands how important it is to deter our enemies.
Let's go down south, and we'll continue to monitor this story as it develops. But back here at home, Florida has become the latest state to limit when a woman can get an abortion. It's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, signed a bill into law making most abortions illegal after 6 weeks. Harrison Calder joins us now to break this all down. And Harrison, I think a lot of people want to know what specifically in this bill and how are people reacting to it.
Good evening, guys. There's a lot specifically in this bill. It was signed quietly by Ron DeSantis on Thursday night, and that's for 2 reasons. Likely because there's a good chance that he wants to stay away from the media. There's also potential that both political parties are very much not in favor of this. The University of North Florida came out with a poll saying that 75% of state residents oppose this bill and 61% of Republicans oppose this bill. So clearly it's not something they're in favor of. And new rape and incest exemptions now up to 15 weeks. But even still with rape, there's a lot of documents that still need to be shown, because if you do not have your documents, they will not give you the ability to an abortion.
And so with this bill passing in Florida, do you think other states will take similar steps in order to do this in their own?
I think there's a good chance a lot of states go in similar directions. Florida has been such a huge part for the Southeast, especially with abortions. I mean, every single state has tried to come down. Abortions have gone up 59% from 2020 to 2022. And we have a quote straight from the White House saying this ban would also impact the nearly 15 million women of reproductive age who live in abortion-banning states throughout the South, and many of whom previously relied on travel to Florida as an option to access care. So with that, all of these states in the Southeast trying to come to Florida, not able to do so now. The only ones with no restrictions are the 2 Carolinas and Virginia. So there's going to be a lot going on there.
You talk about the disapproval of abortion, generally something that's accepted by most of the American population at this point in time, even though it's a long way off. We have to talk about 2024, right? Ron DeSantis obviously angling for a run at president within the next year. How does this affect his chances?
It's going to affect a lot. Abortion has become a huge issue. We hear from Fernando Espuelas. He's talking about it. Let's take a look at that clip.
The issue here is with abortion seems to be binary. Either you are completely in favor or some version of against or some combination thereof. So he's going so far to the right, which will be very powerful, I think, for him for primary voters. But then how does he get independents? How does he get even Republicans?
So as Espuelas mentions, he talks a lot about independence and how undecided Republicans still on the fence, and a lot of it comes down to abortion. According to KFF, 47% of voters from their last election voted because of Roe v. Wade, and 24 of them said it was the main issue on why they voted the direction they did. So there's going to be a lot of various things going on, and it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Harrison Calder, thank you so much. And in other 2024 news, Senator Tim Scott has launched a presidential exploratory committee. Here's some of his announcement video.
If the radical left gets their way, millions more families will be trapped in failing schools, crime-ridden neighborhoods, and crushing inflation. Not on my watch.
Well, if and when Senator Scott decides to run, he'll be the second South Carolinian in the race after the state's former governor, Nikki Haley, launched her bid in February. And Teagan, if you think about this primary, it's starting to get full.
It is.
And I really wonder about Tim Scott, though. How's he going to separate himself from the pack here? We asked the same question about DeSantis in that kind of case. I think it's more so of a question with Senator Scott.
Yeah, I mean, looking at Scott, he was appointed by Nikki Haley all the way back in 2013, who, of course, already declared she was running. And it really is getting full here. It's the question of who are the most likelies, who are the maybes, who are the ones that, absolutely are not going to make it at all, even though they've already declared.
Yeah. I think if you look at that and you look at the field right now of all these people who are in or out, he's standing there in that likely. We see Pence, we see DeSantis, Governor of Florida Ron DeSantis, along with Tim Scott. They seem most likely to be the ones to go in there. Maybe on that maybe line, maybe you see Sununu try to run, and you see Glenn Youngkin, who had a powerful rise to the top in Virginia. But I think one of the things to also mention too is trying to, again, that idea of diversifying yourself, which is quite important in a crowded field like this, whether Tim Scott can try and appeal to the black community at all and try and bring that out in any small margin to help him propel him over the top.
Yeah, that really is one of the questions here. And coming up, a total ban on TikTok, is passed in one state's legislature. Find out where and how much more when Talking Points returns.
Taking care of a family member can lead to plenty of questions. Fortunately, there's a place to get the answers, for them and for you. Find articles, tips, and tools from experts and others who have been in your place. The Caregiving Resource Center at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back to Talking Points. New York Governor Kathy Hochul announcing today that she's nominating Rowan Wilson to be the next chief judge of the State Court of Appeals. The court is the highest in the Empire State and is responsible for managing diverse cases and the state's $3 billion budget. Wilson is Hochul's second pick for the position. Just last year, her first nominee, Justice Hector LaSalle, was rejected by her own party for being too conservative. However, it is expected that Wilson will be nominated without much of an issue.
California Senator Dianne Feinstein is requesting a temporary replacement on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Last week, Feinstein returned to California to recover from her recent case of shingles. Many members of Congress, including California Rep. Ro Khanna, have called on Feinstein to step down. Next week, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer will move forward with a resolution to seek a temporary substitute. And Congress is returning to session this week in Washington with several key priorities on its agenda. Top item for both parties is the so-called Farm Bill.
This massive piece of legislation starts in the House Agriculture Committee. Our own Luke Radel spoke to 4 members of the committee, including its chairman. And he joins us now. Luke, good evening. How soon does this bill need to be passed?
Good evening, Teagan and Chile. The current Farm Bill is set to expire in September of this year. For the past 2 years, members of the House Agriculture Committee have traveled the country, listening to stakeholders in over 40 states. They made their latest stop in Binghamton last Friday to focus on how to best help feed the nation.
Without food, the rest doesn't matter.
That's Shenango County Farm Bureau President Brad Vickers speaking at a Farm Bill listening session held by Republican Congressman Mark Molinaro alongside 3 of his other GOP colleagues on the House Agriculture Committee, including the committee's chairman. Pennsylvania Congressman G.T. Thompson spoke about the importance of listening sessions like this one.
When it comes to public policy, if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu.
Every 5 years, Congress has to vote on a new farm bill. The latest one is set to expire in September of this year. It's an incredibly important piece of legislation covering many facets of agricultural policy, from commodities to conservation, trade to nutritional assistance programs, rural development to agricultural research, just to name a few. So how does Chairman Thompson plan to get these incredibly important provisions passed in such a divided Congress?
Well, I'm dedicated to doing my best, my very best, working with my committee members and support from our leadership, the majority leadership and the minority leadership in Congress, to be able to get this farm bill done on time in a bipartisan, bicameral way, and most importantly, highly effective. That we do our job.
Congressman Nick Langworthy told us how this farm bill stands out in an otherwise divided Washington.
This is truly the most bipartisan thing being worked on in Congress right now. so many of our nutritional needs, but our agricultural future and policy are tied up in this 5-year piece of legislation.
Representative Mark Molinaro of New York's 19th Congressional District explains why he wanted to hold this Farm Bill listening session in Binghamton.
We are establishing agriculture policy for the country, and agriculture policy is as much about supporting farmers and farming as it is ensuring access and food security.
One of the major facets of this legislation is supporting the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP, which is formerly known as food stamps. The leader of one local food bank spoke out in support of the program at the listening session.
Every dollar in SNAP is $1.50 spent in a local grocery store. We are seeing a lot of repercussions of the end of emergency SNAP allotments and other COVID-era programs winding down, so much so that the food bank just had our busiest year in our history, and last month was actually the busiest month in our history, so we're seeing this in real time.
And yet, despite those objections, Republicans like House Speaker Kevin McCarthy are proposing cuts to SNAP benefits as a part of their debt limit negotiations. It's a move that's been criticized by many Democrats and even some Republicans. Both Congressman Mark Molinaro and Congressman Derek Van Orden of Wisconsin's 3rd Congressional District relied on food stamp programs while growing up. Congressman Van Orden told us what this means for his work on the Farm Bill.
It means I understand what it's like to be hungry and understand these programs that we're talking about are important programs. And we've got to look at it from both sides. I'm a member of Congress because of these programs.
Having grown up on food stamps, and by the way, as a county executive administering food stamps, I know not only the value of the program, but the challenges many families have accessing and then finding their way to independence. So all of this is more than informative. It's really important that we get it right, and that's what the goal is.
As Congress returns to session this week, Chairman Thompson gives us his assessment of the outlook on the Farm Bill.
I've been described as an eternal optimist, so yeah, I'm optimistic on this, but it's going to take a lot of work.
And Teagan and Chile, it'll be important to watch these upcoming debt limit negotiations as the House Republicans look to balance the nation's budget while also looking to avoid cuts to popular programs. Speaker McCarthy has already committed to leaving Social Security and Medicare untouched, but with a narrow GOP majority made up of some members who, as we saw, used food assistance benefits themselves, it may be difficult to get majority support for any cuts to SNAP.
And Luke, talking about Speaker McCarthy, he spoke from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange today about the ongoing debt limit negotiations. What did he have to say about these proposed cuts to SNAP?
Yeah, Chile, while McCarthy didn't mention SNAP by name, he says that House Republicans will be looking in the coming weeks to make sure that benefit programs are temporary and not permanent by creating work requirements to use these important programs. Take a listen to what the Speaker had to say.
But this is important. Assistant programs are supposed to be temporary, not permanent. A hand up, not a handout. A bridge to independence, not a barrier.
And at the stock exchange, McCarthy warned investors of a potential default if these debt ceiling challenges aren't resolved soon. Teagan and Chile, back over to you guys.
Thank you, Luke. We'll be keeping an eye on those negotiations as they continue. Well, if you're a TikTok user, this story might be for you. State lawmakers in Montana are pushing to ban the social media platform from app stores statewide. The first time any law like this has been passed in the U.S. Talking Points analyst Peter Berry joins us now. Peter, this bill has been sent to the governor's desk. Do you think he will allow this to pass?
Yes, I think Governor Greg Gianforte is going to sign this into law since he is Republican, and this was passed by a Republican legislator. And the Chinese spy balloon renewed the spotlight on China and TikTok. Just a couple weeks ago, the Chinese spy balloon flew over Montana and surveilled on some military operations in Montana. And citizens and lawmakers alike are still very wary of the Chinese influence in America and how foreign social media service could affect their daily lives. And if it's signed into law, it will take effect on January 1st, 2024.
And Peter, you know, TikTok users already know it's owned by a Chinese company. They know that when they're downloading the app. They know it. They've heard it on TV by now. Why should the government stop them from doing so?
See, the Montana state lawmakers believe that national security is more important than the First Amendment. However, most civil liberty groups are saying this is a form of censorship. And either way, if the government tries to ban this, citizens will find a way to bypass restrictions either by jailbreaking it, changing their IP address, or using a virtual private network. There's still some privacy concerns, but During the last month congressional hearing, here's what TikTok CEO Shou Chu had to say about the privacy concerns.
Congresswoman, I have seen no evidence that the Chinese government has access to that data. They have never asked us. We have not provided.
Well, you know what?
I have asked
I find that actually preposterous.
Our commitment is to move the data into the United States to be stored on American soil by an American company, overseen by American personnel.
Even if this is signed into law, it will still face mass legal troubles. This could be a monumental case for the Supreme Court. It could lead to a giant legal battle between a foreign service, social media, and a whole entire state.
Monumental indeed, and it could start a chain effect if that gets passed, and it stands. Peter, thank you. Coming up on Talking Points, the latest on the war in Ukraine, what moves China is making to back the Russian army, and how America is reacting. Stick with us.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes, B, console her,
don't worry, sweetie. This is gonna happen a lot.
or C, find her a new boyfriend?
Nice single boys. That was weird.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers, but you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
Welcome to my house. Everybody's pretty tired of each other. The walls were closing in. Clearly a case of too much family, too close, 24/7. If this sounds like your house, try going someplace new. YourLifeYourVoice.org. You'll find lots of ideas to help you handle the family stresses of being confined to close quarters. YourLifeYourVoice.org. It could help you find a little more breathing room.
Fancy pants peanut butter? A big screen television? You haven't even brought a sofa yet. A motorcycle? When your father finds out, he's gonna flip his shoes with 2 buckles? What do you even need 2 buckles for? Mr. Big Shot, buying whiskey shots for everybody in the bar. From the looks of it, I'd say nobody even remembers. Feed the pig.
Welcome back to Talking Points. Following his indictment in Manhattan, Donald Trump is now attacking the key witness in the case against him. Our own Jacob Bernadini is here with the lawsuit Trump filed against his former lawyer. Jacob, good evening. Cohen used to be called Trump's fixer, but now they've had a falling out. What happened here?
Teagan in Chile, the former president is no stranger to the courtroom. He's been involved in over 4,000 legal cases. He's added to his total with a $500 million lawsuit against Michael Cohen, who's one of the key witnesses of the hush money case against Trump in New York. Trump claims that Cohen spread lies about him in his media appearances, books, and other statements. In this lawsuit filed in Florida federal court, the suit claims that Cohen revealed confidential information in his media interviews and therefore violated the attorney-client privilege with Trump. Attorney-client privilege is a legal rule that does not allow the lawyer to disclose communications if they relate to a crime the client committed. Trump also claims that he had Cohen sign an NDA as well during this time. But the questions are, why sue him now? And did Cohen truly sign this NDA? For one, Michael Cohen claims no, he did not. In response to this lawsuit, Cohen claimed on CNN that he never signed an NDA, as well as said, and I quote, "That's the whole purpose of this lawsuit. It's to harass and intimidate. It's not just to harass and intimidate me, it's also to put out a message to everyone else that if, in fact, you follow in what Cohen is doing, you too will get a $500 million lawsuit against you, which you're going to have to defend," end quote. On the topic of attorney-client privilege, it could be argued that the Stormy Daniels matter is outside the attorney-client privilege relationship due to past statements on the situation from Trump himself, who has said that he was unaware of the hush money payments. If this is true, then the attorney-client privilege does not apply due to the crime and fraud exception, which allows for the privilege to be broken if the attorney's services are used for a crime. The pathway of this lawsuit is uncertain, but like many of Trump's legal battles, the pathway to its conclusion should be an interesting one to follow. Back to you guys.
Jacob Bernadini, thank you so much. China has vowed not to sell arms to any party in the war between Russia and Ukraine. Despite that, the country is still backing Russia in other ways. Senior analyst Olivia Maniscalco joins us now. Olivia, how is the Chinese government helping the Kremlin?
Thanks, Shilei. Although China isn't aiding Russia physically, they have not told President Putin to end the war. That, as well as President Xi Jinping's recent trip to Moscow, has made Western powers question their intentions. At a recent news conference, Qin Gang, a high-level Chinese official, and Annalena Baerbock of Germany met. The latter pressured Gang to talk to Moscow about ending the war, saying no other country has, quote, more influence on Russia, end quote. Gang said the following. Regarding the export of military items, China adopts a prudent and responsible attitude. China will not provide weapons to relevant parties of the conflict and manage and control the exports of dual-use items in accordance with laws and regulations. Basically, China will ensure that no military items are making its way to Russia. But they will continue to use Russia as a source for oil and gas to help boost their economy. The United Nations foreign policy chief told China it is, quote, a blatant violation, end quote, of its United Nations commitments to maintain support of Russia. Chinese Defense Minister General Li Shangfu is set to visit Russia this week for meetings with counterpart Sergei Shoigu and other Russian military officials.
And Olivia, how much would it likely affect Russia if China did condemn their actions?
Yeah, so it would be a blow to Russia because it is unlikely that Russia would take something like that and just be totally okay with it. And right now, China is a key ally for the country because Russia does not have very many strong allies right now. And ideologically, they match more with China than any of the Western nations. And they want China to help them sort of overthrow the balance the balance that is going on with some of these Western nations. And China would also, it would also not be good for China either because of some of the benefits they get for Russia, as well as, economically and ideologically as well.
Olivia Maniscalco, thank you. And when we come back, we have one final headline for you from the week in politics. Stick with us.
Hi, my name is Sadie Miller.
My name is Luke Brady. I go by St. Luke.
So this one I started with this guitar lick.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Welcome back to Talking Points. Before we go tonight, one more headline to share.
Yes, Congressman George Santos announced he's running for re-election in New York's 3rd Congressional District. So tonight, we're going to review the congressman's scandals in just his first 100 days in Congress.
The congressman has lied about where he went to high school, college, and graduate school.
He also claimed to work at reputable Wall Street firms, Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, but they have no record of his employment.
Santos did work at the Florida investment firm Harbor City Capital. The SEC later alleged the firm stole $17 million from investors.
And as these scandals continue to roll by on your screen, it's also important to note Santos is under investigation at the local, state, federal, and even international level.
Santos is also likely facing an inquiry by the House Ethics Committee after colleagues raised concerns about his campaign finance records. The result of that investigation could potentially be a full House vote to expel him from Congress.
But for now, Santos is moving ahead with a re-election campaign where voters are likely going to hear a lot more about the scandals we showed you tonight and many others we simply didn't have the time to mention because we are out of time on this week's episode of Talking Points. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CitrusTV News. I'm Teagan Brown.
And I'm Chilekasi, Adele. Join us tomorrow for Citrus TV News Live at 6. Until then, take care of yourselves and good night.